I think it's supposed to get cold again later on in the week or in the weekend, but certainly was nice today.
What did Punxsutawney Phil predict this year?
Well, yeah. I think he said 6 more weeks of winter. I think, yes. I'm a seller of Phil. I find him highly unreliable.
Well, welcome everybody. This is the regular meeting of the Pinehurst Village Council, February 25th, 2025. So we welcome everybody here, and as is our tradition, we'll begin with an invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. The invocation will be provided tonight by, for the first time, Mr. Brady Smith, who is the stake president of the Fayetteville, North Carolina West Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Please come forward, Mr. Brady.
Thank you very much. Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity, for this council to meet together. We are grateful for the ability and opportunity and blessing it is to live in this area. We're thankful for the resources of this area, the people and the land. We are grateful for the service and dedication of the members of the council, this village council, and all of the staff of the village of Pinehurst. We pray for the health and safety of all the residents. Bless those especially that are in need. Help them that people will find out their need and be able to help them out. We are grateful to Thee for the wonderful service and work of this council, and pray for a harmonious and productive council tonight. We ask Thee to please bless them as that they will continue to be good stewards of the community's resources and all of the good work that they have been entrusted to do. We pray that Thou will bless them and their families. And we pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the members of the Moore County Scout Troop 1 to come on forward and please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. This is one of the larger groups we've had, so come on up towards the microphone there, and I'll ask everyone to rise. Thank you. Here we go. Go ahead. Here's the flag. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Congratulations to your scout troop. We will go on to reports. Before we begin, I wanted to point out that Councilman Jack Farrell was just unavailable, and so we'll note his absence for today. Thank you. We'll begin with reports. Start with the village manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This week on Saturday is Kids Saturday at the library, so they will be having a kid theme intended for ages about 3 to 10, but that will be starting at 10 o'clock on Saturday. And also, the last couple of weeks, we've talked about creating this new ETJ position on the NAC, so that position is now up and we are accepting applications. So if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to Kristen Bunton, our communications specialist, or you can look on our website and apply there as well. And that's all I have.
I have just a few things. One, I wanted to note that we received a letter from the Arbor Day Foundation congratulating Pinehurst on successfully achieving 2024 Tree City USA status. This is a well-deserved recognition and is a testament to our community's unwavering commitment to the planting, care, and celebration of trees. In preparation for this, I once asked Kevin Brewer, who's responsible for a lot of the grounds and his beautification committee he works with, very knowledgeable. And out of the blue, I said to him, just how many trees do we have in Pinehurst? And sure enough, he got back to me in a little bit of time. He said about 550,000 trees in the village of Pinehurst. So as far as I'm concerned, he's the authority on that subject, and we try to take care of every one of those 550,000 and keep planting them, obviously. Secondly, this past week, myself and a few other council members attended the Neighborhood Advisory Committee meeting, and we had a good discussion about things coming up in the future, in particular about some of the programs and possibilities. Some we'll touch on tonight, having to deal with parking and other topics. And as the village manager mentioned, there's an opening for someone to join the NAC as an associate member who lives in ETJ area. So do please apply if that is something you'd like to be involved with. And no, I think that covers it for me. Let me turn to Dr. Morgan.
Thank you. A couple different things involving the Central Pines Regional Council. A lot of you know that what Central Pines Regional Council does, and it's a organization that effectively is a pass-through for numerous grants that come from the federal and the state level. And they have over $40 million that passes through there on a yearly basis. With the changes in the administration, both for the state and for the federal government, there has been some change in the flow of those funds, and a lot of them have been restricted. They've been going back and forth as to just to what degree on there, and so certain programs are not being funded. With that, looks like one member of their staff is going to be laid off due to a lack of funds that are now coming in, but it's still a time of flux for that. So some of the programs that they were funding in the region here have been interrupted. We are not affected by this here in Pinehurst. So the good part is we're not affected. The challenge is that the regional council is having to deal with a lot with that. Also with the regional council, they had a regional day scheduled for this past Friday. I was actually going to be one of the members on that, which is to give other folks in local government an understanding as to how the Central Pines Regional Council can assist and what all it does. That was canceled secondary to weather. It will be rescheduled at some future date that is currently unknown. So that's all I have for my reports this time. Thank you.
Councilman Taylor.
I was one of those local officials who was planning on attending Regional Day and look forward to it being rescheduled. I attended was also scheduled to sit in on the third meeting of the airport terminal redesign project that was scheduled for the same day as the SMPO meeting. It was canceled due to the weather. It's been rescheduled. I think it's the 5th of March. I think it's next Wednesday. I'm not sure. It's coming up next week. So instead of that, I attended the SMPO meeting. They are certainly beginning to shift gears from what was an unfortunately slow start due to some paperwork issues to really beginning to start chopping some wood and moving in the direction that of things they needed to do. One of the things that they needed to do, and this is a federal requirement, was to approve some targets for safety. And the SMPO has would not have been able to come up with their own targets in the amount of time they had. These had to be approved by this Friday, I think, Doug. So they've adopted the targets that the state has. There's clearly a sentiment, I would say, on behalf of the SMPO, by the time we get to next year, to define those targets with respect to specifically statistics that pertain to the entities that are in the SMPO rather than the state level. We're going to be discussing the STIP a little bit later today, which is beginning to come into focus there. Attended the Neighborhood Advisory Council meeting. I would just follow on Pat to say there are a couple of other, in addition to the new position, there are a couple of other open positions. They're posted on the website, and people who would like to know, both represent their government in speaking to the council and just get involved should take a look at that. That's it for me.
Councilwoman Ficklin.
Thank you. I had the honor of attending the Master Gardeners 30-year anniversary luncheon they had last Tuesday, attended by a variety of Moore County Master Gardeners and a few friends of Master Gardeners. They had a retired extension agent there who had trained over 200 Master Gardeners in his tenure. And he gave a wonderful presentation which highlighted all of their contributions over the past 30 years, which are too many to enumerate, but they have had a huge impact on our community, both here in Pinehurst and throughout Moore County. In addition to that, I attended yesterday our PDO rewrite, or UDO rewrite, kickoff meeting, and that is the official beginning of our effort to rewrite our PDO into a UDO. Very impressive group of people on the focus committee, very diversified, and I also think that our consultants will lead us well through this process. They seem to be very professional and very knowledgeable, and I'm anxious to work with this group. In addition to that, yesterday evening, the Pinehurst Business Partners had their first meeting of the new year, where a couple of new members were welcomed in, and it was a kickoff event, really, for all of the projects that they have for the year 2025, which is an impressive list of projects and events, which we'll get more detail on as they come along. The last thing I was going to mention is that there is a third annual health symposium that will be presented on March the 7th from 10 to noon here in the Pinehurst Village Hall, sponsored by the Women of the Pines, and moderator is Karen D. Sullivan, and with several other physicians attending, and again, this is about a healthy lifestyle. So remember that date, March 7th, here at Village Hall. That's it.
Is there a time for that?
10 a.m. to noon.
10 a.m. to noon. Okay, thank you for mentioning that. All righty. We'll now go to item 4 on the agenda, which is the motion to approve the consent agenda. All items mentioned are considered routine or have been discussed at length in previous meetings and will be enacted by one motion. No separate discussion will be held unless requested by a member of the Village Council. We're approving Village Council meeting minutes. One item is February 11th regular meeting minutes, and the second one will be February 11th work session minutes. Any comments, or I'll take a motion.
I move to approve all items listed and considered routine on the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all adopted. End of the consent agenda. We now will go forward to the public comments section. Those who wanted to make a comment would have signed up at the back, but if you haven't signed up and all of a sudden something's dawned on you and you'd like to make a public comment to the council and so your fellow residents can hear, you're welcome to identify yourself and come on up and stand at the microphone and tell us what you'd like to tell us. Okay. That will end the public comments section. Item 6, ordinances. We are going to consider 2 ordinances. First one will be 25-03, which is the fiscal year 2025 mid-year budget amendment, and that will be followed by 25-04, which is amending the village parking regulations. So I see Dana. Please come forward, Dana.
Yes. Good afternoon, Council. All right. So every year around in February, we go through this exercise of determining projections of where we think we will end up at the end of the fiscal year. The reason we go through this is there is a statutory requirement that in the budget, the proposed budget that's presented and that's part of our budget development process, we have to include an estimate of the year-end revenues and expenditures. going through this exercise is what provides the amounts that are part of that, meeting that statutory requirement. And you see those numbers are in the SOP document each year. So this is the process we go through to develop those in advance of when we really start the budget in earnest. And so as part of this process, I work through each of the revenue accounts, looking at where we are through December 31st, primarily for certain accounts, depending on when the timing of, revenues being earned or collected. I may also look through, the current date that we have, which was through the end of January, and make adjustments based on that, looking at historical, collections or results through the end of the year, any other information that we may have from the league. They provide revenue projection memos, particularly for the sales taxes and other taxes. So various sources of information that we use to come up with these estimates. And so the summary is here. It is very favorable this year in terms of what we're projecting. We're looking at about a $570,000 projected increase in revenues compared to what we had budgeted, so collecting more in revenues than what we had budgeted. And these estimates here are going through every line item that is in the budget. When we get down to the actual amounts we're proposing in the mid-year budget amendment to kind of align the FY25 budget better with these estimates, we are not adjusting every single line item to what we're projecting. We're picking the most significant ones that we feel are we feel the most confident that they will come to fruition. So we are not adjusting every dollar to these projections in the budget, just the most significant items on both the revenue and expenditure side. But overall, projecting about $500,000 or $570,000 in revenues above what's currently budgeted, and that when also factoring in about $1.8 million in expenditures that would be less than what we have budgeted. We'll go through that in a minute. We would ultimately then be reducing our planned fund balance appropriation, meaning what we're drawing from the village's fund balance to balance the budget by $2.4 million. So that is a good thing.
Question at this point. If revenue is running ahead of projections and expenditures are running behind projections, why are we projecting that expenditures will exceed revenues at the end of the year?
They will still exceed the revenues, and that is where the fund balance appropriation comes in.
I understand where
Yeah.
it comes in. I'm just trying to gauge why we think they'll exceed revenues if right now revenues are running ahead of projections and on expenditure side they're running below.
Yeah, it just hasn't, we're not projecting enough additional revenue, and we're not projecting for expenditures to be well enough below the budget to close an $8 million
So
gap.
is in the second 6 months of our fiscal year, are we expecting particular expenditures that we know is going to cause us to fall short of the revenues that have come in?
We're looking, can you repeat your question, please,
Well,
Mr. Mayor?
again, the sentence that jumped out at me is that at this time, I estimate the village's expenditures will exceed its revenues at year end by 4.7 million. At this mid-year point, we're running ahead. So I'm trying to figure out what is the next 6 months that's going to change that pattern.
I understand now. Thank you for clarifying that. During the first 6 months of the year, we collect 93% of the tax revenues, which are the most significant portion of the budget. The remaining 6 months of the year, we're spending still essentially pretty much 50% of the expenditure budget, the majority of that being salaries that we're spending pretty evenly throughout the year. So as the year goes on, at some point those expenditures get ahead of the revenues.
That's
just
why.
based on that timing. It's because of the.
All the revenue
The
that comes
tax
in.
revenue coming in very heavily at the beginning of the year and funding expenditures through the full fiscal year.
I get it now. Thank you.
Dana, I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, we budgeted at the beginning of the year a mismatch between operating revenues and total expenditures, and those total expenditures in part include capital items that we deliberately know that we are going to fund from fund balance transfer.
That is
So
correct.
Even if we looked at the budget, we had 26 million four in revenues, we had 31 million eight in quote-unquote total expenditures, which includes capital items.
That's correct.
If
So
we pulled those out and we looked the way a for-profit entity would, you'd look at operating income or operating revenues, operating expenses, and capital as a separate item. So some of it is semantic, if you will, and some of it's timing.
yes, that's correct. Considering the budget as a whole for the fiscal year, we already knew that we would not have sufficient revenues to cover all of the expenditures for the year, including the capital. And this year, we also have 2.8 million budgeted to transfer to the library project fund for funding construction and other expenditures as that project moves along. And so we already knew we were going to, in order to cover all of those expenditures, we would have to draw from fund balance. We would,
to the
otherwise
extent-
we'd have to raise significantly more tax revenue if every year's budget had to have revenues equal expenditures without ever being allowed to draw from fund balance.
To the extent operating revenues are ahead, that may or may not continue, we don't know. And total expenditures are behind. The difference in those two numbers is why you were reducing down from 6.1 to 4.7, the expected net result.
Yes.
That has to be financed by fund balance transfer.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, that's correct. So if we look at the expenditure side of the equation, these are the estimated differences between our projection or our estimate and the current FY25 budget by department. The majority of them are lower. One that is increasing is streets and grounds. We'll discuss that further when we get down to the mid-year amendment piece. It has to do with the significant capital projects that are budgeted within streets and grounds. Out of the 1.8 million that we're projecting expenditures to be below budget, about 1.2 million of that is in salaries and benefits. We have had some key positions that have been held vacant this year that are providing a lot of that savings. In addition to that, then you have the associated benefits for retirement and medical insurance. We also did have savings in our workers' comp renewal that we had this year.
One question, why the Public Services Administration has the largest variance, the percent change column stands out?
Yes. The public services budget original budget included $400,000 for potential land acquisition for public services relocation. We, at this point, believe that will not be needed this year since that project or initiative is sort of on hold unless some other opportunity comes up. And so we're removing that $400,000 from their budget, anticipating that it will not be used for that purpose.
For this year, okay.
Yes, for this fiscal year. So that 400,000 of that is that one particular budget item for capital.
And Dana, I'm assuming that the personnel vacancies that were not filled actually fall into each individual line item. So in other words, if we didn't have 2 police officers hired, they would go from the police budget, not from human resources, correct?
Correct. Yep, that's correct. The amounts presented here are inclusive of salaries, benefits, operating, and capital expenditures within each department. So you see administration is one of the larger ones as well. There's an assistant village manager position and organizational performance director position that have been vacant for so far this fiscal year, for the majority of the fiscal year. So that is driving the most significant portion of those savings. So that is within administration. And likewise, any positions, any savings from salaries are within each departmental budget.
Thank you.
Yep.
And again, with revenues 570,000 ahead and expenditures 1.8 million ahead, that's a total of 2.4 million. but your projected net increase at the end of the year from 6.1 to 4.7 is only 1.4 million different. So presumably, I would assume expenditures are probably going to catch up by 1 million in the second half of the year, whether that's capital or something else.
1.4,
From 6.1 was the budget to 4.7. That's an improvement
oh, okay.
of 1.4, but we're 2.4 ahead at the moment, through 6 months, I should say, not.
Yes. So this here shows how we get from that fund balance appropriation number that's in the budget to the final estimated amount that's presented here. And the missing piece is the reappropriation. There was 1.9 million of reappropriations from last fiscal year that were approved in August. That is, when we approve the expenditure of those items, it's also added to the fund balance appropriation to cover it.
It seems like we almost always have something there. It can vary, but we just don't get all the work done that we plan for various reasons. Weather could be one of them. And then we just carry that over into the next year as opposed to needing to find new funding for it.
Correct, correct. And since those funds were not spent in the fiscal year in which they were intended, on a budget to actual basis, they sort of essentially have then increased fund balance or been a favorable change to fund balance compared to what we had budgeted for. And that's one way of thinking about why we are then using the offset as fund balance appropriation when we fund those expenditures or approved for those expenditures to be added to the subsequent year's budget. So this just shows how we're kind of rolling forward the fund balance appropriation that was of the 6.1 million that was in the approved budget, the original budget. We added 1.9 million of reappropriation. That gets us to the about 8 million that is in the current budget fund balance appropriation. And then from there, we're factoring in the additional revenues that's favorable, the lower expenses that's favorable, and brings us down to about 5.6, 5.7 being the estimated fund balance appropriation.
But does that reflect the amount of money we intend to use on the library construction?
Not fully. It would be a combination of the funding for the library. We have 2.8 million budgeted, but also other capital that was above and beyond.
Did we carry over some capital also, or is that in that number?
We did. So it would be inclusive of carry forward capital and current year budgeted capital. So as Mr. Taylor had mentioned, even in our original budget, we knew we were going to be drawing from fund balance to pay for some of those capital expenditures.
Right.
Yep, that was already planned.
And Doug, as we work through this year's budget, would you think you might have a recommendation as to whether we should fill or eliminate the currently vacant assistant manager position and performance measurement position?
Yeah, we'll have that discussion, and we'll see how the budget plays out and see how much money we need to balance the budget, so.
Sounds like a good plan.
Very facile answer.
So from there, then we're also, if we look at ultimately at the end of the day, where we think our fund balance will end up, we always have this discussion of our kind of expected or estimated budget to actual variance that impacts our fund balance projections. So you'll see within the budget, we're saying the fund balance appropriation would be 5.6 million. However, we do always kind of plan for some additional budget to actual variances, typically that they will be favorable, meaning that even beyond the 570,000 of additional revenues that we're projecting, the estimate includes that we will achieve an additional 1% favorable variance when we get to our actual revenues at the end of the year. And for expenditures, an additional 3% savings. That gets us to be more aligned with the 1% revenue budget to actual variance that we project and a 9% operating expenditure budget to actual variance that we use in the budget. And so with that, then our projected ending fund balance for fiscal year 2025 would be 18 million, 18.8. I apologize, this should say FY 2025. I just realized
Oh,
that.
okay, okay, now I get it. So that's a healthy, what was our no, well, that must be there.
Yes,
Yes,
so,
okay, there it was.
yep. So in the original FY 25 budget, in the SOP document, we were planning on 16.9 million.
So we're gonna have more than we budgeted, and we'll have, though, less than what we actually went through at the end of 24.
Yes. Yep,
Okay.
because of that assumption that we're going to use some for the library and other capital. Yep.
Okay, makes sense.
So that is kind of the overall results of the projection. And again, you'll see those numbers in the proposed budget as well as our FY 25 estimate. Out of all of the projections that were prepared, now we would get to where what we're proposing to actually amend in the FY 25 budget. So as we work through the remainder of the fiscal year and are preparing the FY 26 budget, having a budget that's a little more aligned to what we expect the year-end results to be. The first item that we propose adjusting is increasing our real and personal property tax revenues by $120,000. This is based on the actual tax levy year-to-date that we receive from the county and our historical collection rate of 99.9%, which we are on track to meet this year. This is really driven by the valuation being higher than what we had estimated in the budget. Within the restricted intergovernmental revenues, we're increasing the PAL bill allocation to the actual amount that we received from NCDOT for the year. That has increased beyond what we had budgeted due to higher allocation rates. There's a per mile rate and a per capita rate. Both of those are higher than what we had projected in the original budget. Similarly, the state aid allocation from the library is $223 higher. That's not thousands or anything, but there is a requirement that we have revenues budgeted for grants before we are allowed to, in order for us to actually be able to expend them. So even though these two are small dollars, we technically need to have them in the budget to be able to expend them. And then the Given Memorial Library in 2023 received an ARPA grant that was about $41,000 or so. And this fiscal year, the state had some funds remaining that were not spent from that pool of funds they were given, and we received an additional $330. So similarly, we're just adjusting that budget to officially be allowed to spend those funds. That's just going to offset library operating expenditures for salaries. Within permits and fees, based on what we've collected to date, for building permit and inspection fees, we estimate that we will collect about $300,000. So we're going to increase that budget by $25,000. And within the fire district revenue, the portion that we receive on a recurring basis from Moore County is $90,000 more than what we had estimated. Additionally, the county provided about $18,000 for radio replacements for the fire department. That was not known at the time we prepared the budget. We recommend increasing those to match that, but the Taylortown Fire District revenue is about $31,000 lower than what we had planned. And so the net change to that budget is $74,000, an increase. Within other revenues, the library transfer agreement requires that the Given Tufts Foundation transfers net income from the Given bookshop operations to the village. We did not anticipate any revenue from that in this fiscal year in the budget, but they did have a $12,000 surplus for calendar year 2024, which is great. We received those funds, so we want to add those to the budget.
Question there, because when I'm in there, it always looks very crowded. Do we anticipate we'll have sort of a continued flow of money from them, whether it's 10, 12, 15,000 or something? Is that realistic to think about in the future?
I think that is definitely the goal, is that they do continue to operate at a surplus. I did meet with Kara Mathis and Bailey Jordan with the foundation several weeks ago to discuss the results of the operations from 2024, and they're also going to keep me posted with their budget for this year, which will give us a better idea of whether, what we may be able to expect, whether we decide to include it in the budget or just be conservative and leave it at zero. And if we get something that's great, we can have that discussion during the budget development. But I know their goal certainly is to continue to operate at a surplus.
Go ahead, someone else? had a
So
question?
this is kind of a discussion for another time, but we had also talked about, rather than putting that money directly into the budget with the village, we could put that directly into the trust that the Given Tufts organization is managing for us. So that money will still eventually end up going to us. It'll just build up the trust over time.
Yeah, well, that leads to the second bullet. I was trying to understand what the village receives and can count on, so to speak, regarding endowment income. So remind me how that's structured, because that's,
Yes, so the endowment income is, it's specified in the library transfer agreement, and the village receives each year in December 4% of the 3-year rolling average of the endowment investment balance as of June 30th. So the FY25 budget was an estimate of what the based on what the 3-year rolling average for June 30th, 22, 23, 24 would be 4% of that number. Obviously, when we're developing the budget, we don't know what the June 30th, 2024 number would be yet. That's determined once we get that
And does the-
investment statement from the
the
foundation.
endowment itself, that's not carried on our books, though.
No.
That's theirs.
That is
Okay.
that belongs to the foundation, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just add that that formula is a fairly standard formula that's used by university endowments and what have you. There is considerable debate as to whether 4% is correct. They have other operating budgetary issues that suggest that maybe it shouldn't be 4%, but that's, for a long time, that was virtually universal.
Yep. But yeah, those two pieces make up the support that we receive from the foundation on a recurring basis.
Great.
And then finally, in investment income, investment rates are higher than we had projected in the budget. The budget was pretty conservative on that, just given what FOMIC information we had at the time, and also our actual cash balance that we have on hand is over $3 million higher than what we had estimated in the budget. That's really primarily driven by the additional surplus that we had in FY24 compared to what we were budgeting at the time. And so that has led to favorable investment income compared to our original budget. I recommend increasing that by $187,000. Then on the expenditure side, I recommend adjusting the governing body legal services down by $20,000. We mentioned the two positions in the administration department. So I recommend adjusting that down by $200,000. In human resources, we always have sort of a pool of money in the budget that is meant to fund market adjustments that we would use to reallocate to other departments that received market adjustments that year if it would cause them to exceed what we had budgeted for their salaries. That's not needed this year. All the departments' salaries are fine within what we had budgeted, so we're just eliminating that $65,000 from the budget. Gas prices have been lower than anticipated, so we recommend reducing that by $50,000. Yeah. Since that's within fleet, we're reducing departmental budgets to account for that.
Where do we buy our gas, and is it available for citizens also?
It is not.
Okay.
The village has its own fuel tanks for the fleet only.
Okay.
We do allow county EMS to fuel up there, but we charge them for that, and they reimburse us the cost of that fuel. But it is not open to residents.
Thank you.
Then we talked about this within administration, or public services administration, reducing the 400,000 that was in the budget for the land acquisition, since that's not being pursued currently. Then there's a few items within streets and grounds, these next three. The pedestrian facilities, sidewalk pathway funding that's in the budget is not sufficient to cover the bids that we received for the Juniper Creek Boulevard sidewalks in number 6. So we did discuss, do we reduce the scope to fit it within the budget, but given what the difference is, and we know we have some other reductions that we're making in the budget that would offset the increase that is needed within streets and grounds to be able to just complete the project as it was bid with the planned scope. We are requesting to increase that budget by $150,000 to be able to complete that as planned. Oh, and that also includes some funds to construct a pathway connecting a neighborhood to the Greenway that was not planned in the original budget.
What was the original budgeted amount for the project?
For the sidewalks,
Not including the greenway, just the sidewalk, yes.
yes, let's see, that was, no, let's see,
Round numbers, it was like
It was a-
950,000.
yes,
Over
Yep.
4 years, right?
yep,
For the sidewalk project, it was 950,000 to complete the number 6 loop, or from the southern entrance to Deerwood. And our bids came in roughly 150,000 more than that.
Is any of the, what is it, $400,000 per year included in that 950?
Yep.
You know what
So
I'm talking about?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a couple of years of that we built up, yes.
yeah, it's 460,000 that was budgeted in FY '25 plus rollover from the previous fiscal year that wasn't spent. Yep.
And the next item, the parking spaces, that's the 5 spaces?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and that 85,000 was based on, at least a portion of what it was based on was last year, some parallel parking and some other spaces were paved downtown. And so we used that the cost of that project as at least a starting point for an estimate.
I'm not saying it's wrong. It seems like a lot for 5 spaces. Do we have to do some redesign of curbing and what have you? It's
Yeah,
more than
so-
just paving 5 parking spaces.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. So there is no parking space there right now. It's a kind of a little loop, that drive-through area. So we're removing that and the island right there and adding 5 spaces.
Thank you.
And then this just rounds out within the streets and grounds to, if we have an increase of 150, an increase of 85, there's also a decrease of 12 that will get you to the change in the ordinance that you see for the increase for streets and grounds of 223,000. And then finally, the USGA did elect for this year, for 2025, to be the first year that they receive their economic incentive grant payment under that agreement. This was not included in the original budget, since at that time we didn't know what year they would elect, and they did notify us that they want, it's based on their 2024 tax bill, and I'm estimating that will be about $25,000 that we would pay back to the USGA under that agreement. So we need to add those funds to the budget to be able to make that payment.
And have all the performance commitments been met?
We have not received the documents from them yet. They're working on it. Did they give us an estimated timeframe, Doug?
I said March.
March. So once we receive those, then we'll be reviewing that to make sure they met all the performance
They've
commitments.
represented at least verbally that they believe they have, and
Yes.
it's
Yes.
just catching up with the paperwork.
Yes.
Is this going to be sort of an annual, for going forward, 25 for so many years, is that, or
10
more if it's
years.
more? Yeah,
10 years, yeah.
10 years, right, okay.
If they add to the property that it impacts the valuation, it will change the dollar amount. Or when the county revaluation happens, that will impact
Yeah,
the
or
dollar
our
amount
tax
as
rate
well, right?
potentially, yeah.
Or if we change the tax rate, yes, anything, it's 90% of the taxes, the Pinehurst taxes that they pay, not any of the county taxes, just the Pinehurst taxes. All right, but, so those are the proposed amendments to the budget that are in the ordinance. Any other questions?
I think it looks like we're on solid footing going forward, which is important, and we can fulfill the obligations that we've talked about to our residents for the last 6 to 12 months when you go back to the planning cycle. So thank you for your work and the staff's work on this.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. Thank you, Dana. I don't know if, I don't think you have B. I think that's Doug, right? Are
No,
you-
but we do need
I
a.
think
We will need a
We need to,
motion.
yeah.
we need a proposal here.
I move
I'm
to,
sorry, we need to adopt it. Oh, okay,
I
sure.
move to approve ordinance 25-03, amending ordinance 24-11, and appropriating funds for operations of the Village of Pinehurst for fiscal year 2025 regarding revenues and expenditures of the general fund.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, adopted. Thank you. Doug, whenever you're ready.
Okay, sure.
This has to do with village, amending the village parking regulations. We've talked about this as a council, last month or two, and I guess we are very close here to making a decision. So go ahead.
Great, thank you. And actually, before I start, being an Eagle Scout myself, I just want to recognize that our scouts are still here and listening, and you don't have to stay all meeting. Of course, you're welcome to, but appreciate you being here.
Is there a merit badge for governmental affairs? or-
There is, yes.
Actually, it's community in the, our citizenship in the community. You have to attend an event like
You have
this.
A city council meeting or another one, so.
Very good.
But there will be a take-home quiz.
Yeah. Just be careful, you may end up being a city manager.
Or a council member.
That would be worse, yes. All right, so moving on to parking. Last time we met, there was a few items that came up. I'll briefly go over those. So one, amendment to Cherokee Road. So we added the spaces along Cherokee near Tufts Park, as well as in front of the Holly Inn. Any questions on that? We kind of had discussed all that, I think.
Just to be clear on the Holly Inn, it's not the two immediately from the front door, it's the two on the curve going up to Dogwood.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we also brought up the vehicle length restrictions. So I'm sure you have experience when you try to drive through some of those areas. If there is a large vehicle parked angled, it's difficult to get through. So this is something that was kind of brought up in email. We haven't actually discussed it as a board, as a council. So I have in the proposed ordinance that anything over 18 feet long would be prohibited from parking in angled and parallel parking spots. So if that's something we want to remove or change, we can still do
My
that.
understanding is when we stripe parking spaces, they're 19 feet deep.
They are. And so the reason why we went with 18, people may say, oh, my vehicle's 18, but you may have a hitch that's sticking out and things like that. Also, at our last meeting, we discussed the amount of the fine, so I have updated that to be the $50 that we discussed at the last meeting. And delivery vehicles has also been brought up. I did not actually amend this in this ordinance because there is an existing loading and unloading zone language that I think actually kind of meets what we had discussed. So it is a 30-minute limit, and it is between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. are the only times that you're restricted from having any deliveries during those times. So that's already an ordinance that we have on the books.
One question going back to the penalty section there.
Yep.
How will we, or obviously the village police, address repeat offenders? Is there any particular approach or a best practice that's expected to be followed? Or
So repeat offenders will will be fined every time that they do it. There is not an escalated scale for, second, third, or fourth offense.
Right, that's allowed some places, it's just not allowed here statutorily. 50 is the limit.
50 is the limit. Could we start at 25 and then increase it? We could. It would be administratively difficult for us, especially since we're not using a software system.
Right.
I think we discussed this last time also, and this is one of those topics that we're probably going to revisit
Right.
as we get some more experience and see how this all rolls out.
Sounds fair.
And Doug, I wasn't, we have an existing ordinance that says that deliveries are not allowed between 11 and 2.
Yes.
So in theory, no one should be parking in the loading zone along Magnolia between 11 and 2. Or can I go park my private vehicle there for less than 3 hours?
Yeah, so this is the language directly from the ordinance. So no person shall park a vehicle, et cetera, in parking schedule 4. We can look that up. But between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., except in areas that have been clearly signed and dedicated as loading and unloading areas by the village. So that area along Magnolia would be allowed because it's clearly designated as unloading.
Therefore, I can receive a delivery there as long as, in those hours, if the person delivering it parks there, not somewhere else.
It would be the delivery for a restaurant that's parked in the middle of Chinkapin.
That's,
Yes, that
So-
should not be allowed.
do we know if vendors are aware of this, or is there a way we can make them aware of it if they're not, so that there's,
I think the best approach is when we have someone on staff that is out
Okay.
there enforcing it, they can remind them and let them know of the ordinance.
good idea, thank you.
Is there any exemption for the FedEx or the UPS guy who comes in, stops for 3 minutes and is gone?
Currently, there is not.
I would put that under Dr. Morgan's category of let's see how it goes. And
Obviously, the parking attendant will have some ability to recognize when is an appropriate time to write a ticket. So
But
it is-
if that truck was to park in one of the vacant diagonal spaces for a half hour and drop off items,
I think they're too big. They
well,
won't-
that's,
they won't fit.
okay, if they're not, or if they're, but if they are, if they don't break the 18
No, but
foot thing.
The issue's not the truck that pulls up, they bring in 4 boxes and they're gone. The issue's the food truck that wants to serve multiple restaurants and they're there for a half an hour or, whatever. And I think we will only know that with some experience.
Right,
Yeah, I think that is our best approach. Let's
Okay.
try it for 6 months and see
Let's
what
do it.
adjustments we need to make.
sounds good.
I did put on here a brief outline of timing for implementing our time parking enforcement.
Doug, I like your outline. I would add one item, and that is meet with the merchants. Somewhere, obviously, somewhere in April or May or whenever, but there needs to be some period where they not only get something in writing, but the personal touch, so they're aware and they can inform their employees, more importantly,
Yep.
about these restrictions that are coming.
Yeah, that was certainly our intent, but yeah, I didn't include that on the list, but thank you.
I think it's unlikely we get pushback from what I will call street-level retail, but you never know. And I'd love to know it now rather than 4th of July weekend.
Yes. So with that, the ordinance is available on here. I have, any changes have been bolded and underlined. So I don't think it's necessary to go through it line by line. But if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
I do have one
Yep.
really minor suggestion. Under vehicle length restrictions, your memo states vehicles no longer than 18 feet. The ordinance says parked in a diagonal manner and is less than 18 feet in length, and that's technically 2 different things. And it might be better to use the wording you used in your memo for clarification.
True, that
That's
is.
a good point.
18 feet or less.
Yes, which is what your memo, it says no longer than 18
Less than or
feet,
equal to 18 feet?
Yes, yes.
or no longer than 18 feet. Anyway,
It's just, I guess the point is, we need to be consistent in both parts.
right, so,
Okay, I agree.
gray areas,
All of this is to be effective July 1.
not a gray foot.
It is.
The other question I have is, are all of these parking spaces in our right-of-way?
No, so there are a few that are directly in front of the department store building and the theater building. I talked to the owner, and he would like us to enforce it just like we are enforcing our own parking spaces.
He could change his mind at some point in the future, but for now, is happy to go along.
Yes.
I was really referring to the towing piece of this, which is related to the right-of-way, parking in
Oh.
the right-of-ways.
Not in the downtown area, but
But in other places,
Right. I just wanted to know if they're all in the right-of-way or not. That's the question.
sorry, I'm not sure I'm clear what the question is.
According to the towing information that is in this ordinance, you get towed if you're parked in a public right-of-way. So my question is, are there any of these that are not in the public right-of-way?
Yeah, it would only be those few in front of the department store and the theater building.
I think we've concluded the discussion part of this. Doug, you have the answers you need?
Yes, so if someone wanted to make a motion just with amending it to be no less than or equal to 18 feet or to something to that effect.
my only question is, I think we've coalesced around this, subject to tidying that up. But do we want to have Doug have any discussion with merchants first?
Wait, yeah,
And we could adopt this at our next meeting. We don't have to adopt it now, since it's not going to be in effect until July 1 anyway.
Yeah, it's not a huge rush. So we did hold a business listening session in January with the intent to talk about this. It turned out that not many people showed up, and the 3 businesses we heard from were in favor of it or were not opposed to it.
Let me ask, Barb, you met with the Pinehurst Business Partners. Did this come up when you were meeting last night or the other night?
I brought it up, and I had a map with me and offered to answer any questions and show my map, and no one asked me any questions about it. So.
Based
on
on
I'm
that?
happy to move forward.
All right, we have a motion to entertain here.
I move to approve ordinance 25-04, amending Chapter 72 of the Pinehurst Municipal Code as it pertains to parking in the village of Pinehurst, subject to the clarification of language with regard to vehicle length that we've discussed.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have some new village parking. Guys, thank you. All right, now we go to regular business and the return of Dana, I'm sure. This is the FY 2025 financial statements for the 6 months that ended December 31st of 2024. Just as a reminder, our village fiscal year begins on July 1 and ends on June 30th. So December 31st is the midpoint. Okay, Dana, go right ahead.
Thank you. Yes, so since we have already talked somewhat about where we're at so far this year and looking at where we're going to end, I'll try not to belabor this or be too repetitive on some things. But overall, we're in a great position at this point, or through December 31st, halfway through the year. We have about $8.5 million in net income. As we were talking about earlier, that is really just mostly a matter of the timing of the property tax revenue coming in the first half of the year. Overall, our cash and investment balances are doing very well. You can see we have a higher balance than in previous years, but trending very similarly. You see that big spike in August, September timeframe. That's when the majority of the tax revenues come in, and then you see it declines as the year goes on, as we're spending throughout the remainder of the year. When we look overall at our year-to-date budget, when we enter the budget in our accounting system, we enter it in with quarterly estimates of what we think we'll spend. So this year-to-date budget is based on what we thought we would either revenue we would collect or what we would spend through the first 2 quarters, actuals through the first 2 quarters, and then the difference. And then we have the previous fiscal year through December and the variance between current year actual and prior year actual. Overall revenues are ahead of budget, which we had talked about, and pretty consistent with the prior year. Our revenue increases really are driven by property taxes. Sales taxes are higher, but I would caveat that with the fact that our sales taxes are collected on a 3-month lag. And so through December, we have 6 months of sales tax revenue estimated there, but 3 of those months are estimates, not based on actual collections. And the sales tax collections have been, or the growth has been declining year over year for the first 3 months of the fiscal year that we have actually collected. So even though it's higher than last year, it is getting smaller in terms of that growth with sales taxes.
Yeah, I would just add, so yeah, in the past we would have hundreds of thousands more in sales tax than we originally budgeted. This year it's just a tiny bit more. And so we use that a lot to balance the next year's budget because there's always a lot of extra money there. Thing we'll have to look at closely as we develop the FY26 budget.
Yeah, we will. It is a significant portion of the budget, but it's something that we will not be able to rely on to grow at the rate it has been the last few years. With operating expenditures, which includes the salaries and benefits, we're about $2.5 million below budget. About half of that is the salaries and benefits savings that we had talked about earlier, and we're pretty much flat with the previous year. That's really the COLA increases, merit increases, any salary increases that we had in FY25 have pretty much been canceled out by the savings that we have from lapsed salaries. And then within capital outlays, we are underspent there, but that's typical of just kind of the timing of when we think we may spend the capital funds versus when we actually are able to complete the projects. So overall, we're in a very good financial position at this point in the year, and I would say very similar to where we typically are as of December in any given fiscal year. See if there's anything else I forgot to point out. This goes through a lot more details, some comparisons of the tax levy and what we've collected to date year over year. But again, we've collected 93% through December compared to 92.5% as of last year. So our collection rate is very consistent with what we've seen through December. With the Fair Barn and the harness track, through December, the Fair Barn covered 81% of its operating expenditures after accounting for discounts. This is a decrease compared to last year where they were at 93%. There are, I think, November, December tend to be very busy months, or at least the fall, and then December with holiday parties and things like that at the Fair Barn. The revenue growth and operating expenditure growth are kind of staying in line, but the discounts to not-for-profits this year has been much higher than in previous years, which is really what is primarily driving that percentage down year over year.
Just for my own clarity, that 81% of operating expenditures is for the 6-month period. It's
Correct.
Not projecting forward. Okay.
Correct.
Thank
Yes,
you.
this is just actuals through December 31st. And then the harness track covered 43% of its operating expenditures with its revenues. This is down from 51% in the previous years. From what I can tell, it's really mostly attributable to the timing of when we collected for stall rentals for this training season. Last year, so there are some clients that will pay a lot up front. This year, that timing has been different. One thing we did is Parks and Rec now has the harness track stall rentals going through our Civic Rec system. So just like when you go to register for a program with Parks and Rec, the individuals who are renting stalls for the training season, or renting a groom's quarters, they're able to sign their contract, make their payments online through that system. And I think that may just be affecting the timing. They're taking advantage of paying on their monthly invoice as they get it in their email, maybe as opposed to choosing to pay it up front and just be done with it and not have to worry about mailing a check. That's an assumption, but it may be something that's impacting the timing.
And I thought we had seen fairly recently that actual stall rentals are up for 170 versus 120 or something. So
Yes.
we might expect this percentage to increase in the last 6 months.
Yes, that is correct. When I looked this morning at the revenues, we're now ahead of what we had budgeted for the whole fiscal year through today. So those collections have kind of caught up based on the anticipated stall rentals and what we had contracts for. That is correct. I think this is just at that point in time where I think as the training season was really just ramping up and
Do you have a
again, just
guesstimate of
being-
where we may come out, what percentage we may cover this year?
I have not looked at the percentage that we may cover, but I know revenues-wise, we're anticipating 180,000 for the stall rentals, and I believe it was 170,000 last year. So slightly higher than what we had in the previous year.
Let me see. I had one question on financial outlook. We talked about permits for new permits being issued. Last year, we had, in the end, I think it was 76 was our residential permits. And but last year at the midpoint, we had hardly any new permits. So
Yes.
this year, we're quite ahead of that. And, you know, we probably will hit at least 75, depending on how the world works out there. But that's a good number, because last year was the first time in many years that we actually had an uptick in the amount of
Yes, there have been
permits.
a few years of decline.
Yeah, because in FY '20, it was 188, and it kept declining until it was down to 65, and then in '23, and then last year it went up to 76. So that's something worthwhile watching. Thank you.
But Danny, you say that fewer homes and commercial buildings are being constructed, but permits are up so far. You have almost 2 more full months of permit applications. Is there a declining trend such that when we get to the full year, permits may be down?
Alex here?
Doug is not.
No. Do you know anything, Doug?
I would expect us to kind of continue at the current trend that we're above last year, but not back to what it was like 7-8 years ago when we're building 150 to 200 houses a year.
I mean, I'm surprised that we're at 34 versus 12. I would have expected a slowdown. We haven't seen it yet, but we may by the time we get to the full fiscal year.
Yeah, and interest rates have a lot to do with it, and eventually there are fewer and fewer places to build a house in
Right.
Pinehurst.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last item on here was just the Library Expansion Capital Project Fund. That project will be bid in the coming months, and the fund balance as of December 31st was just over $1 million. So once construction starts, we would spend that $1 million and transfer additional funds to that from the general fund as it's spent through the course of the project.
One of the things you provided us was the financial statements for the 6 month. Are you going to go through those quickly, or?
I was not going to go through page by page, but if you
Okay.
have any particular questions,
I
I'm
just
happy
have
to answer
a
them.
couple of questions. On page 7, I think we sort of touched on this, why we were at 90% of our 2025 budget spent year to date for the revenue for the fair barns, for the fair barn. Is that,
Yes, so for,
is that 90% looking ahead? So if we got 10 more percent, we're going to be over 100%?
yes, yes, so we've already collected out of the 249,000, that's 90% of the budget, but essentially these event revenue discounts for the nonprofits reduce this revenue number. So when you reduce the 240 8,000
Oh,
by the 93.
so that's a gross number, not a net number.
Correct. We gross up those revenues to be able to quantify what is the discount that we're giving for nonprofits.
I
So
see.
once you factor that in, this is not really, we're not at 90% of the budget halfway through the year.
Okay, well. Okay, hold on, let me make a note. I would not have figured that
Yeah,
one
and
out.
this is where you can see we've given, through December, 22,000 more in nonprofit discounts at the Fair Barn compared to last year.
So, about holding you to anything, but do you think we'll still exceed 100% at the end of the year?
Yes, yeah, we're on track definitely, at least to meet the budget, and should hopefully exceed it, whether it's by a little bit or a more substantial amount, I'm not sure, but we definitely will at least meet the budget.
Okay. Then let me jump to the harness track. The current year, in this case, under the prior year, is there one thing that sticks out there about that number, the 12,547?
Yeah, this is where I think it probably just has to do with the timing of when payments were made for stall rentals. We already at this point, through today, have exceeded last year's revenues by how much? I forget now. We're projecting 180, but I know we're already, exceeding the budget for this year based on what's collected.
Now, how far in advance do people rent a stall? I mean, are there already rentals for next year and the year after, or is it?
I don't believe there's already rentals for next training season starting the fall of 2025. People start to reserve maybe in the summertime, a few
Right,
months
yeah.
in advance, but typically not too far out.
Right, and most people pay by the season, and I forget, but I think it's if you don't pay by the end of January, then there's an extra fee tacked on for, late
Oh, okay,
payment.
so there is some incentive to order
Yes,
early.
and there is incentive to pay like a seasonal rate versus month to month.
Okay.
So just some variability and maybe what people opted
I mean,
to rent this year, whether they're more
As you look at the
seasonal rates
data,
or-
obviously, there's the effect of COVID in there, but it looks like we are climbing,
Yes,
so,
yes.
okay, hold our breath there.
On the harness track, we have met as a management team with Angie from Parks and Rec and with Dana, and we'll be coming later to council with a more comprehensive discussion of the harness track and how
Great.
much money it raises and spends.
Great, no, I look forward to that, and I think it's important, given its history in our community and the potential there that could be there, but we need to know more about the details.
And if we
Dr.
get-
Morgan, you have something?
If we can get a breakdown also before the meeting of a lot more detail on the expenditures and revenues on there, I'd appreciate that. This is the 50,000-foot level. I'd like to see about the 5,000-foot level. So.
We can do that.
Absolutely.
I think at a summary level, we're seeing some increase in interest. We've spent some money, made some improvements, and that might even carry through into next year as the word gets around that, hey, it's better than it used to be.
Yeah, I think we have the potential to raise revenue through stall rentals a little bit, but the amount that we're going to bring in is kind of not very much compared to how much we spend. So
Okay. Could you remind, I don't see Angie, she was going to do a little, or maybe it's going to be when we meet, a little analysis of these training tracks that have closed in the, whatever, 300-mile area of this place. Just, I'm curious how many of us are left standing out there. And so.
yeah,
anyway.
we can incorporate that into our
That'd
more
be-
comprehensive
yeah.
discussion.
That'd be great to know. Okay, two other quickies. On page 11, the percentage of year-to-date capital outlay budget expended is a quarter.
Yes.
At 6 months, it's a quarter rather than a half.
Yep.
Why does that work that way?
And that's percentage.
Well, I can jump into that. So a lot of that is the sidewalk project in number 6. That's $1 million, so that's a big deal. And then the other big portion of that is the Chinkapin intersection with Magnolia that is also about to get underway. So really big projects that are going to be happening now. So we should be spending a lot of that money in this next quarter.
They're in the second half of the fiscal year, not in the first half.
Correct. Yes.
That explains that. I knew there'd be an answer.
Yes, and since a significant portion of the funding for those projects was part of the reappropriation from the previous year, that ends up being added to the budget in the first quarter, which is not always necessarily, especially in the case of those two significant projects, not aligned with the actual anticipated timing of when it will be spent.
Last question on page 12. The motor vehicle increase, a percentage of 11.7% versus the real and personal property at 1.3. Why that big differential there? People
That
buying
is-
more cars? I mean, I'm just trying to
I
understand.
mean, that is what it comes from. Newer cars.
Newer cars, yeah, and cars are more expensive. I'm not sure if any of it would have to do with, I'm not sure how the DMV values them, if they have made any adjustments to how they depreciate the value that your taxes are based on. That I'd have to research, but the primary drivers would be people buying new cars that are higher value than, what they replaced.
Okay, it just sticks out.
And
It's interesting.
I would speculate that vehicle availability 2 years ago is not what it was today, so some people may have postponed due to they couldn't find what they wanted.
That is true. It was really hard to buy a vehicle.
Yep.
Okay. I have no other questions on, regarding that. Does anybody have anything else they want to ask or add on the 2025 fiscal statements? No? All righty. I don't think we need to do anything more. Thank you very much. It's always eye-opening a bit, so we appreciate that. We will go on to item 8, which is other business. So I'll turn to my colleagues. Is there anything in particular under the heading of other business anyone would like to raise?
Not me.
Barb? Nothing? Okay. I don't have anything in particular. I guess I will just turn to Doug to refresh us all. For our next meeting, is there anything we ought to be thinking about that will be on the agenda that?
Discussion about fire stations and sidewalks will be big.
Okay. Very well. Hearing nothing under other business, I'll entertain a motion, and then we can reconvene in about 10 minutes to go into our work session.
I move to adjourn the regular meeting.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned for 10 minutes.